All right. I'm seeing us stabilize a bit in terms of attendees, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So once again, welcome everyone. My name is Christy Wake from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I'll be facilitating this session kind of in the background for the most part. But I do want to welcome you to the research conference, the very first virtual research conference promoted by the Center for Research Quality. And this is the first paper presentation of the day. There are, I believe, 3 others going on at the same time, but we're certainly glad that you chose to attend this one. This is the Assessing the Effect of Global Mindset on the Development of Leadership Competency. Before I introduce our presenters, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to talk through a couple housekeeping items. And here we go. We are using Zoom for the webinar platform today. And you can adjust any audio settings that you have using the audio settings button in the lower left corner. When you click that, it'll expand a window. You can test out your microphone, see if your speaker is working the way that you are hoping it would. Sometimes those are the most challenging things during these webinars is the audio. So that's how you can access all of those settings and make adjustments. Down in the center of your screen, you'll see that you have a few options for engagement. You do have a hand raise option, and because we're a smaller group, that might be something that we can manage for today. However, we would like to request that you all utilize the chat area. We actually don't have that icon displayed down here, but where the Q&A is located, you'll see, actually here it is, never mind. There's a chat button. You can click on that and type in any questions or comments that you have. We'll be monitoring that space throughout the webinar today. And you do have the option when you enter in your question, if you'd like to send it anonymously, you can. Last thing I want to point out is the view options. Sometimes Zoom, the window displays at different sizes or different ratios. And so you can adjust the ratio that displays at, clicking on the view options drop down. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce our 2 presenters for this session. We have Dr. Sri Banerjee and Dr. Bruce Ragon. And I believe Dr. Bruce Ragon will be kicking things off this morning. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to him now. Bruce?
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate that. Hey, welcome everybody, and thanks for taking your valuable time today to spend a little bit of that time with us. Christy, go ahead and let's go to the first slide here. Basically, this was a study that so interested Sri and I, just because we're both interested in that leadership component and how we improve leadership for us within a public health setting. But we also wanted to take a look at this concept of global mindset, which Laureate had really kind of jumped on as an organization in an attempt to improve the folks that they were hiring into their organization. And so Shree's going to talk about that specific component as we move through this. But as far as our outline today, we're going to talk just briefly about understanding leadership, utilizing primary research to understand the linguistic anthropology model, recontextualizing global mindset in the context of leadership and health sciences, and then we're going to talk about applying this new research bank in pedagogy. Okay, that's kind of like the cliff notes of what we're going to handle today. Okay, Christy, let's go ahead. So this is essentially our abstract. Specific leadership traits are imperative. And I think we all know that, but the dynamic interaction from a global context is something that has really not been looked at. And so that's something that we wanted to take a look at because the current literature is a little bit unclear of that. And so we want to take a look at analyzing Laureate's professional assessment data which they're able to pull from about 15 different countries that we could use. And we found that the language spoken significantly modified the effect of the global mindset on leading others. And again, we're going to talk about the specifics of that as we move through the presentation. But that's essentially the essence of our presentation today. Okay, Christy. So what is this thing we call global mindset? Well, its application to leadership kind of hit Shri and I when, as we're going through the literature to get a better understanding of this, we came across a piece that asked an important question of some 700 HR managers. And it was asked of them, what was the most important characteristic of future leaders? Very legitimate question. But their response was quite interesting. And their response was that we need to develop borderless leaders. I thought, wow, borderless leaders. And that really kind of hit us, especially as we look around the world today. There's a concept that some people are promoting of nationalism. And here's something that is obviously quite contrary to that. So as we started to take a look at this a little deeper, then we started to take a look at this global mindset. And what in the world is this thing that we call a global mindset? So it's a set of individual qualities and attributes that help a manager influence individuals, groups, and organization from other parts of the world. Now, the funny thing is, as Walden, we're accustomed to dealing with students, faculty members, and administrators who essentially are all over the world. So this idea is not necessarily new to us, but this global mindset is one that some folks struggle with, and especially in leadership roles. It's a way of being which requires cultural intelligence and cultural awareness and skills associated with intercultural empathy. Now, again, as Walden folks, we're pretty accustomed to this. But I think as we look around the world, we can see that this intercultural empathy is something that we at times struggle with. And then there are times that we take it and we generalize it to such an effect that we actually miss some of the pieces to the puzzle. And I'd like to share with you as we move on one of those, and that has to do with one of the students that I'm working with is in an area of Texas, and there's a huge population of Nigerian and Nigerian American within that general vicinity whose cultural beliefs about COVID-19, for instance, are very different. And so we need to get better at understanding this intercultural. Has the willingness to engage with other, openness towards divergent cultural experiences, and a search for contrast rather than uniformity. It's kind of a neat concept, isn't it? Contrast rather than uniformity. And by working collaboratively within and across cultures, one can grow cultural intelligence. And that's really what we're looking for in this study was, what does this cultural intelligence have to do with this process of a global mindset and on leadership? All right, Christy, let's go to the next slide. Now, when we take a look at leadership theory, one of the pieces that really kind of hit us was that we define it very differently. It's the ability to recognize, read, and adapt to cultural signals, both overt and subtle, so that your effectiveness is not compromised when one is dealing with people from different backgrounds. We have a tendency to think sometimes that everybody thinks like us. And my wife reminds me frequently that not everybody thinks like me. And so it's a piece of this puzzle that we have to get better at dealing with. A global mindset is associated with cultural competence, recognizes personal cultural biases, and developing a cohesive cultural sensitivity. Now, we obviously in our country have been experiencing a lot of those kind of issues, but I think we need to make it, as far as our leadership situation goes, it has to be an intricate part of that process if in fact we want to produce leaders that are much more effective with this global mindset. And it can be identified by understanding one's own cultural biases. And I think that is the area that we oftentimes struggle with. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Christy. Thank you. Is understanding what our biases are. Now, we got a little carried away with the colors here. I hope you enjoy those. Yeah, it's quite a wake me up at this early in the morning. But the bottom line here is that linguistic anthropology is the language of socialization tradition. Now, we're going to talk here in a second about the linguistic anthropology model. And I think you would all agree with me. We need another model like we need a rash. So, just like, holy, another model. But I think as you take a look at the concept behind this linguistic anthropology model, because it's how language influences our social life, either as individuals and communities. Okay. And that's a real critical piece of this process, because linguistic anthropology essentially explores language and how it shapes communication. And language, as we know, plays a huge role in social identity, group membership, and establishing cultural beliefs and ideologies. And so language is such a critical piece of this puzzle as we take a look at how culture plays into this concept of a global mindset and how it then plays in to leadership. One of the pieces that we have to take a look at is what is effective communication. And generically, about 58% of effective communication has nothing to do with the words that we use, but it has to do with our body language, so to speak. About 35% of effective communication is the tonality or the tone of voice that we use. And only 7% of effective communication generally is what we say. It's the talking part of it, okay, the words that we use. And what we know from linguistic anthropology model is that those things change within cultures. And so what we think we're saying in a particular culture may be completely different in another. But what we've gotten accustomed to is that we're going to take a particular group of people. Let's say we're going to take a group of African Americans, or we're going to take a group of whatever. And we're going to attach these cultural norms to them. When in fact, within that group itself, there's going to be a myriad of different cultural norms. And we have to understand better the linguistics, the language, the models that those folks, those smaller subgroups are using within those larger groups. Okay, Christy, go ahead and go to the next one if you would, please. Okay. You got to, yes. Yeah, you're welcome for using all the, yes. Yeah, we use multiple colors here as well. So the bottom line here though is, and I was really trying to find something, and as I was talking to Sri, I was trying to find something that really kind of summed this up. And I live in North Carolina, and so one of our heroes in North Carolina on PBS is the chef Vivian Howard. You know Vivian? Okay, well, Vivian's got a little pizza place down in Wilmington where I live. So, but one of the things that really kind of hit me is when Vivian was talking about barbecue. Okay, Bruce, what does barbecue have to do with linguistic anthropology? Okay, so let me ask you, when I say barbecue, what do you think of? Do you think of a tomato base? Do you think of a vinegar base? And if you're in Creole country, your idea of barbecue is going to be completely different than any of those first two. And as you move through North Carolina to South Carolina and Georgia and around the Horn, barbecue is completely different. But if we basically jumped out at you and said, hey, how would you like some barbecue? Would you know what we were talking about? And that's the essential piece of linguistic anthropology. We have to get better at asking those key questions of what are we talking about? And it may be flippant to compare culture to barbecue, but the essence is the same. It changes by a variety of geography, culture, ethnicity. There's a variety of demographics that play into actually understanding what we mean when we say linguistic anthropology or we say barbecue. Those questions have to be asked. And so that's really the kind of the key of this whole process. And in our world of public health, when we look at things like how do we impact people regarding COVID-19? Well, we have to understand what their beliefs, their attitudes are in their particular group of people, rather than taking this generic piece and saying, well, this is how these people believe. Really? Okay, well, what about these subsets? Do they also believe that way? We know that among African Americans generally, there's a distrust for the healthcare system. Now, does that apply to everyone? No. Is it stronger in some groups than other? Yes. And the more that we know, and a lot of it has to do with this linguistic piece and understanding the culture of the group that we're dealing with. That makes sense? It's kind of a crazy term, but I think for a lot of us, it basically takes what we've known all along, that culture is such an important piece of it, and it ties it directly to this linguistic piece. And so to be able to solve this problem, we need to look at those linguistic pieces, because what we say, and as this model will show you, the tone and speed of our voice, gestures, facial expressions, and personal and social values can all change based on the linguistics that we use within a particular group or culture. Okay, next slide, please. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague and friend. Shree's going to take us into the research side of it. Shree, all you.
Thank you, Dr. Ragon. Thank you for that wonderful background information that you provided. It really, all of, as Bruce said, all of these elements and aspects of global mindset and understanding how language plays a role in that really factored into how we conducted this roughly 2-year study from the grant that we got from the faculty research initiative. So this was what informed our formation of the research gap. So we wanted to specifically find out how cultural aspects of language influence leading others from a global mindset. In this study, unfortunately, we were limited to just looking at language and kind of extrapolating that to having the understanding of how language influences this relationship. So I'm going to show in subsequent slides the model and how we kind of manipulated all the variables and everything in order to show the relationships. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of a busy slide. I'm not sure if you're able to see every square, every rectangle, but this is part of the Laureate Professional Assessment. So the way this professional assessment worked is that over a number of years, Laureate institutions, individual students from Laureate institutions, they were asked to take this assessment and they were based on their responses provided corresponding sort of score. So think of this as kind of a GPA, right? So a GPA is an assessment of a person's academic achievement, and then LPA, it's kind of their professional acumen and how prepared they are to get into that. Next slide, please. So this is just one of many sample questions, many questions that were provided as part of the LPA. And if you take a look, maybe you can kind of answer on your own what is, based on the scenario that's provided. One of your coworkers is responsible for creating a weekly progress report of the patients. You have developed similar reports in the past using the same software that he is using. Your coworker is new to using the software. You notice that he's using a very inefficient process to complete the weekly report. So as a result, he's doing more work than necessary. So what is a step that you would, and this was used to understand kind of the cognition, the understanding of the student of leadership traits and other types of traits that were assessed within this LPA. Next slide, please. So when we first had the proposal, we had to submit a proposal in order to be assessed if it's acceptable for the FERD grant. This was the model we kind of started off with. So as you can see, global, it's a simple model, similar to what Bruce was saying. We don't really need any more models, but sometimes we need something to work off of in order to clearly illustrate how we're going to be conducting a study. And when it's or analysis, when it's something that is this long, you really need a guiding model. And as Dr. Ragon said, there's about 15 different languages that were incorporated into this significant study. So global mindset versus leading others, right? So this is where that is a bottom arrow. So the first thing that we explore, and the findings that I will be showing you, has to do with leading others, okay? So we explore that variable. Then we try to determine kind of how language spoken is related to leading others. So that's what I'll be presenting in the subsequent slides. Then using Pearson, we actually went in and determined what language was, had a higher kind of relationship versus a lower relationship. So I'll show that in subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Ragon indicated, there were multiple languages, and these were all of the countries that were included. So this is a multinational assessment that was conducted by Laureate, and so there was a lot of useful information that came out of this. I made a small note there. Brazil was excluded due to insufficient sample size coming out of there, and it's curious why there wasn't as many respondents, and it might have been the way it was administered. However, rest assured, we were able to capture Portuguese from, of course, that's the national language of Brazil, but even though we weren't able to capture Brazil, we were able to actually capture the responses from Portugal. So this is how Portuguese was covered. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is, again, another busy slide. There's a lot of numbers. So putting some numbers into what Dr. Ragon wonderfully introduced to us, I think really will hit home with understanding how all of this works. So in this regression model, the relationship that was assessed is, remember, going back to that one slide with the model, this is just a relationship between language spoken and leading others. So language spoken, what we did is we dummy coded. And as you can see, these are the different languages that at the end got included. And of course, we controlled for time to complete the questionnaire. So that, if for some reason somebody took a longer time to complete the questionnaire or a very short amount of time, that would not impact that relationship. So that was controlled for there. So let's take a look at some of these numbers and some of these betas, right? So first of all, most of these languages, with the exception of Portuguese, had a significant relationship in leading others. So the comparison, of course, when you're dummy coding, you know that there's a comparison group. So the comparison group here is English. So even though all of the betas are negative, some are more close to English, with leadership than others. So this shows the variation that language has in cultivating, just cultivating leadership, cultivating the trait of, cultivating the leadership trait. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to go a little bit further in depth into what we found. So main thing, we found that leadership proficiency level is significantly associated with language spoken. So going back to the model with linguistic anthropology, that shows that language really is playing a major role in socialization of the person. So how you carry yourself, what language primarily you speak, these things really have an impact. And so tailoring pedagogy in terms of, how people cultivate these leadership qualities is extremely important, especially for a multinational sort of school like Walden University. We cater to many different cultural backgrounds, students from many different walks of life. And how if we do that effectively, these numbers are really showing that. So the respondents who completed the questionnaire in Spanish in Latin America had significantly lower mean leadership proficiency than individuals who spoke English. So, I want to steer clear of making overgeneralizations of certain populations and certain groups. That I want to steer clear of. However, with that said, it's really important to understand that we're not all we're not all having the same culture and same background. It is important to keep diversity in mind. And this, leads straight back to a lot of the national conversations we're having about promoting nationalism versus promoting a global mindset, and the continuum in between how we strike that balance. Economically, we're going through these movements where countries are making sure that they're sustaining their own population, sometimes at the expense of others. So we have to be very careful when we're taking a step back from globalization, that we don't lose our cultural sensitivity. That is so critical and important to be an effective leader. Again, going through some of the other languages, there were significant differences. So that's important to note. Next slide, please. Okay, so this goes into the correlation coefficients, now looking at the relationship between global mindset and leading others. So these correlation coefficients are assessing the strength of the relationship. So this is not only looking at significance. The p-value, of course, is significance, but how meaningful is that p-value? So that's where effect size comes in and is extremely important to understand as well. So let's look at English first. I mean, the relationship between global mindset and leading others has a pretty significant medium effect, right? Looking at German, there is a large effect However, the sample size was only 11 in that group. So, it could be argued that there was no significance due to the fact that there was inadequate sample size and power. But as you can see, if you look at the global sort of relation, and use a different word here, if you look at all different languages, that's the bottom row, right? If you look at that, there was a significant relationship between global mindset and leading others, and the effect was medium. Okay, next slide, please. So I went over this kind of already, but using Cohen's convention, there was moderate correlation overall between global mindset and leading others. So some linguistic groups, there was a smaller effect, and other linguistic groups, there was a larger effect. So depending on this, we can inform pedagogical strategies in order to teach different groups, in different ways. So there might be certain pedagogical approaches which work better for a certain group versus others, especially when we're cultivating leadership. And leadership cultivation, it is not just limited to a business degree. And when we're talking about leadership, this is in a cross-disciplinary sort of finding. So it can be in public health, it can be in nursing, it can be in many different disciplines all across the university. So can we go to okay. So now we are going into kind of understanding this and broadening this model into understanding how change adaptability plays a role here. This was not the original focus of the whole study, but this is an additional component that we can kind of take a look at to understand this relationship better between global mindset and leading others. So next slide, please. So again, this shows some of the relationship between change, adaptability, and global mindset and leading others. Can we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? So some change in general, right? Uncertainty, change, all of these things, they disrupt routine sort of flow of things, and it can be disorienting. So learning new skills to cope with the environment does not necessarily lead to lessening anxiety when it comes to leading others. So you might think that change adaptability is always good, but we have to be careful and try to also focus on resilience and some of these traits when we're understanding the relationship between global mindset and leading others. And that can be disorienting. So think about the concept of cognitive dissonance, right? So when you're learning new concepts, when you're incorporating a global cultural mindset, this can lead to some related anxiety, and you have to be able to, be resilient and be flexible. Okay, so next slide, please. So, controlling for seconds to completion, institution, and assessing for the association for the global, for global mindset and leading others. So change adaptability was used as an effect modifier and found that low change adaptability leads to better association between global mindset and leading others. It came as a shock to us initially because, you think that change, if you're adaptable, then that might be helpful. But it seems like stability and resilience it might be something that may need to have focus on in subsequent research. Next slide, please. So this is a little reflection piece here for all of you that have been so attentive in listening to the presentation. So now that that there is certain linguistic approaches which play a role in global mindset and cultivating leadership. Now that you know this, what are some strategies that you can use in your classroom to try to cultivate this kind of global mindset that is so critical to being a successful leader? Do you have any ideas on how you can do this? I know we have people joining in from multiple disciplines. So if you can maybe type in the chat box, and so we can maybe do this and respond to questions that you may have at this point. Dr. Ragon, did you have anything to add at this point as well?
Well, I think, Sri, that the real key has to do with the fact that we as people looking to embrace a wider assortment collection of folks, that if we do not take into account the cultural differences and use what you've described very well as this global mindset, then not only are we not going to be effective leaders, but we're just plain not going to be effective. Because by taking a generic approach is that, oh, here's an idea that meets this large group of people, then our effectiveness is diminished greatly. So as we start to take a look more at the subcultures within a culture, instead of looking at, oh, everybody who lives on the east side thinks this way, well, nothing could be further from the truth. You got 5 different cultural groups that live on the east side, so to speak, and each of them have a different view. And it all has to do with this global mindset. So for those people who are sitting out in the audience thinking, well, I'm not going to do anything globally. Well, in fact, you do. Just by living in the communities that you live in, there's a global structure about the community that you're in. And if we use this concept of saying, hey, we need to be more knowledgeable about the subgroups, subcultures within our own global community, then we can be more effective in the different initiatives that we take for, as you mentioned, for a public health setting, for a political science setting, for whatever setting we're looking to be in. So, yeah.
I completely agree with that. I think that even within a culture that seems homogeneous is in fact not. We are very multicultural. Even in the community I reside in Lancaster, we have an Amish community who has their own set of traditions, beliefs, cultural ideas, which not only contribute to their own community, but contribute to the community at large in Lancaster County. So not being aware of that is at our peril. It really would be costly for us. So I wanted to go ahead and address some of these questions. One of them, we were asked about the LPA being translated. Correct. The LPA actually was translated and administered in all of these different languages. So ensuring that, one of the ideas about incorporating into pedagogy is that ensuring that learning content, examples, and scenarios include referential details and settings that represent different cultures. They're using case studies, which I completely agree, like using case studies that may be enriching to the concepts that you're teaching. Individuals that are from different backgrounds can actually really help to have a full curriculum. Dr. Vicky saying, I professionals and guest presenters from various cultures and disciplines to expose students. Study travel was also a favorite approach. How do you envision we might adapt international cultural exchange post-pandemic? So, a lot of things that come out of that is not necessarily, cultural exchange in terms of having different perspectives necessarily visit your class, but also people from different disciplines. So culture is very broad here. And I think there's really excellent opportunities in the online classroom to incorporate all of these multiple perspectives. I'm going to go through this. I know we're running out of time here, so I want to be respectful, of the time that we have together. So I'm sure that being conscious of cultural difference in a group will bring about efficiency in a group made up of many cultures. Absolutely. That allows for intercultural communication to be cultivated a lot better when we are respectful and sensitive to culture. Cultural. So what was the distribution of the participants with respect to subject matter studied, courses in leadership, cultural awareness, along demographics? So, we're limited to the data that was collected with the assessment. So in terms of some of these breakdowns, we don't have that information because the data was not necessarily available with subject matter. So I find it important to support different styles of engagement. Some students like debate and very specific examples. I think it is also important to make sure there are different modalities for engagement. Yeah, good. So not only is real time, maybe like we have now, seminars, things like that, important, but also, announcements, and certain cultures have more power distance than others, right, between faculty and student. And this was part of some of the side projects that we did out of this. And it was interesting to see how that played a role. So countries with higher power distance had a stronger relationship rather than others. So this is very relevant research in today's business environment. Thank you for the presentation. The psychometric properties of the instruments used in the research. So this is well-validated instrument. This is an instrument that was validated, ahead of time. So we are, as in terms of the relationship between, the bivariate analysis that we conducted with Pearson correlation. In that one slide, I think there was an R-squared value as well.
Hey, Shri, I think we got to send it back to Christy here. So.
Okay. Well, I would love to go through all of them, but for the sake of time, I'll hand it back to Christy.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Ragon. That was a really great presentation, and we had a lot of attendees on the line, which is exciting, and love to see all the activity in the chat too. All of the posts in the chat will be saved. You can certainly engage with the presenters using the app, and then just so everyone knows, the session was recorded and the materials will end up being published into ScholarWorks, so you'll have access to review these materials at a later date. I do want to just remind everyone that you have a bit of a break before the plenary sessions start. We have the first and second plenary being offered concurrently, beginning at 11 Eastern. And like I said, you have your choice between two of them. So take the next 15 minutes and stretch your legs, and then we hope to see you at one of the two plenaries coming up at 11. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.